Good evening, and welcome to the August 26, 2009 Civil Service Commission meeting. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Devine?
Here.
Gantis?
Yes.
Manukian?
Yes.
Coleman?
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Abkarian is absent.
Next item, please.
Minutes?
Move for approval. Second.
We have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Manukian?
Yes.
Coleman?
Yes. Next item.
Oral communications.
I have no cards. Anyone in the audience? No? Okay, next item.
Eligible list established.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item relates to the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting. As you can see from your report, we have two lists that have been established. Both of these happen to be promotional, one for a power plant shift supervisor in water and power, and the other an administrative associate in management services. The number of applications received is listed, as well as the total number that ultimately made the eligible list. If you have any questions about these two recruitments, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions? I hear no questions. Next item, please.
Report on advertising budget expenditures, April 2009 to June 2009.
Okay. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this report is the quarterly report on the city's advertising expenditures for the period of time from April 1st, 2009 to June 30th, 2009, essentially the last quarter of the 08-09 fiscal year. The report details the expenditures during that quarter, along with the total amount that was spent throughout the course of the year. Once again, due to a significant slowdown in the city's hiring, we have had less need to advertise and expend money from this budget. You can see from the report we were allocated $61,000, which is typically what we need in order to have enough funds to advertise in a given fiscal year. And throughout the course of the entire year, we had just spent a little over $17,000 in that year. So there was some savings achieved. The report does address the different places where we have spent our monies over this final quarter of the 08-09 fiscal year. The report also addresses the year-end fiscal year report relating to where we obtain a lot of our applicants for these jobs, as well as those people that we've actually hired, where those people found the information about city employment. As you can see, the most significant source of all of our job applicants, as well as those being hired, comes from people who check our city's website. The report indicates that 57% of the total applicants found the information on the city's website. When you look at those actually hired into jobs, that number is 52%, but it is a general indication of essentially where the advertising is most effective, and it's easy enough to point to our website as being the most effective way to get the word out. This report also addresses some of the projects that we're currently working on, and some of the things that have been part of the last few months of our recruitment and outreach activity. As indicated by the report, the city is very close to being done with a police officer recruit short film that we're producing, focusing on the Korean community for careers in law enforcement. Rosie Akopian from my staff is working with the police department on that. They have a very close to being finished with that project. Very rough draft of the video is completed. Just needs some finishing touches. And when that is done, we'll certainly let the Commission know and possibly have a screening for you as well. Staff also participated in the city's cruise night, as well as a few job fairs. We mentioned the one that was held at the Employment Development Department, which was at the Verdugo Job Center on July 29th of this year. And I'll also add that the staff participated in a job fair at the Verdugo Job Center on May 29th, focusing on veterans returning from military. We were there as well, and also Rosie and I participated in an event sponsored by the Women's Commission on June 1st, dealing with not so much careers in the city of Glendale, but discussions of how to get on boards and commissions in the city of Glendale. So anyway, it's a very nice event. In spite of the slowdown in hiring, staff is doing everything they can to try and increase our outreach and do what we can to be a good partner with this community. So with that, if you have questions about the report, be happy to try and answer them. Again, Ms. Kopian compiled this information. She's here as well.
Yes, this first. Go ahead, John.
I just would point out, I noticed it says total expenditures for the second quarter. This is actually total expenditures for the fourth quarter.
Oh,
fiscal year 08-09. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
I'm done.
Anything else?
Yes. Yeah. I was curious, when you look at the expenditures, it looks like the lion's share of the expenditures go to entities that produce the least amount of results. For example, Glendale News Press, it was $1,190, and yet when you look at the results produced by the news press, it's insignificant compared to the others. So I'm wondering if there's ever any thought given to reducing significantly the amounts going to these particular sources and relying on our website and all these other entities that give us the biggest bang for our buck.
Yes, absolutely. I mean this is really the second year we've produced this report. I think it's only the second year, and we do look at where we are getting our applicants from, as well as most importantly those hired, and that is a factor in considering where to spend our advertising dollars. So yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. And I didn't particularly catch the news press, but it did show that we have a small number of applicants from there, but it doesn't appear that anyone was actually hired after having advertised there.
The most amount of money for the news press during this period. So it's just a thought that hopefully you'll be able to use this information to reallocate expenditures.
Absolutely, and again, when we look at, we don't do a lot of advertisement in the news press, and we don't do a lot of print advertising anymore because it just isn't as cost effective as it once was. But the reason we would select the news press is for jobs that would focus on candidates that we'd want to look at a local pool. That would be positions more at the entry level. But it's definitely a factor that we need to look at in the future, and whether or not that is effective. I will note that the daily news, which I never viewed as a significant source of potential candidates or hirees, we actually did hire 9 people from advertisements in the daily news, which is a bit of a surprise, versus none from the Glendale News Press. So it's a little bit of a interesting note.
Anything else on that particular item? Hearing none. Next item.
Discussion of workforce demographics report.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, we have provided you, for a second time, a copy of the workforce demographic report that was prepared earlier this year by our city auditor and his staff. This report was completed in June, and copies were dropped off with the Commission at the June 24th meeting. Commissioners requested some time to review the report and possibly bring it back at a later date, and the date selected was today. So this report, in summary, is really a very, very comprehensive report of the city workforce and factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, broken down into a variety of different statistical measures. It reflects the hiring data for the 2008 calendar year, and it also, I think, probably the most beneficial part of it is that it tracks the similar periods of time going back all the way to 1999, which is brings us to pretty much our 10th year of doing this report, and it's very interesting to see the patterns in hiring that have occurred, and not so much in the hiring, but in our overall demographics, which a lot of it is related to the people that we have brought on over the past 10 years. There are a variety of different conclusions that can be drawn, and there's a lot of analysis and probably about 100 different charts that you can look at, and I'll just leave it sort of open-ended to the Commission as far as what you'd like to focus on, if you have questions as well. We have Jason Bradford, who is Principal Internal Auditor. He is the one responsible for compiling this data and preparing the summary analysis along with Bill Fox. So he is here if you have questions on any particular
methodology type topics as well.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Mr. Bradford did an outstanding job. I did go through this, and the amount of work and time to put this together was tremendous, just looking at it from a layperson standpoint. So you're to be congratulated, and very, very impressive job. Thank you very much. I do have a question, however. And this could go to either Mr. Bradford or Mr. Doyle. Based on the conclusions and the trends shown in this report, is there anything that the Commission should be aware of in terms of any changes that should be made in direction, or directions that should be looked at in terms of concerns that you might want to bring to our attention, so that when we see future bulletins and future job, maybe we can make adjustments there to take care of any concerns you may have shown in this report?
I'll answer.
And maybe Jason will want to add to it, but
may I just add to that question? Are there any concerns? Because I went through this with a fine-tooth comb, and it looks pretty good to me. I mean, the change in the demographic of the workforce over the last 10 years, I think, is significant considering our overall population. So, if there are any concerns about if we're missing something here, or if I'm missing something, I'd like to hear it too.
Chair Coleman, and I too am definitely pleased with the progress that's being made here, as well as the patterns that have clearly emerged from this report, which to me, most significant being really the shift in the workforce to a much more diverse workforce, clearly much more representative of the community which we serve as city employees. To me, that's a very positive thing. As you can see, we have become a much more diverse organization, even over the last 10 years. And some of the reports really get detailed as far as why that is occurring, and it does show that people that have been hired on in the last 5 to 10 years do tend to be more diverse. There's more different people, different races and ethnicities are being brought on more recently, and those who are at the end of their careers, those who are retiring, tend to be less diverse. We're seeing the employees who have been with the city for 25, 30 years tend to be predominantly white and predominantly male, whereas those who are coming on are extremely diverse when it comes to the different racial and ethnic groups. We're seeing a sizable jump in Armenian Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans. So from that end, I agree with you, Chair Coleman. This is very positive outlook overall. If I had a concern at all, it would be the rather static number we're seeing with regard to women, females. It would be nice to see those numbers increasing, particularly in the upper management and executive levels and things like that. I think overall we've seen over the past 10 years an increase and a decrease, and I think that's the one area where we have not seen quite the progress that we've seen in other areas. That would be my only concern. And again, there are things that we are doing and really focusing on with regard to the hiring of females that I'd like to certainly pursue more of. And again, if the Commission has thoughts on that or direction, we'd certainly be open to that.
I understand what you're saying, and it's kind of a segue into my next question. We had talked about, when we reviewed the fire department hiring of women several months ago, maybe 8 months ago, and we talked about things that could be done to possibly increase the number of women in the department. And one of the things that was brought out, I believe you brought it out, Mr. Doyle, was that the rule of 3 whole scores could be an impediment to hiring women. And that, as I understood when we left that meeting, you were going to look into the possibility or the options of changing that. I think you said it was a ordinance change that be required.
It's more than that, sir.
Go from the rule of 3 whole scores to another process where you could reach further down a list to pick up women. So my question is, have you looked into that at all? And if so, where are you on that aspect of looking at the women's situation?
Well, the Rule of 3 issue is more complex than simply changing an ordinance. The Rule of 3 is embedded into the charter, which is what to change that would require a vote of the people. And Chair Coleman a few years back was on the Charter Review Committee, in which this issue did come up. Is it worth changing that? And there was a great deal of opinion on both ends of it. To answer your question, nothing's been done to pursue a change in the charter. I'm just a little old department head here. It'd be hard for me to initiate something like that, particularly when it's that particular issue is somewhat, there's mixed opinions on that. I think when we brought the fire department report to you and we looked at how we compared to other fire departments elsewhere, I think one of the key points was that we don't have as much flexibility as some of the other cities in reaching further down on eligibility lists, and that applies whether we're trying to hire women or any particular group of people. And I think what we pointed out was our neighboring cities have different aspects, such as the rule of the list or banding, which enables the consideration of more than just 3 candidates for each opening. The city can look at 30 candidates or 50 at a time and go wherever they want on that list to start making selections. Again, the rule of three is a very embedded component of our hiring process, built into the charter. It's there in Article 23 of the charter, which is what our civil service system and our rules are based upon. To change that would require quite a campaign, which again I open to exploring that, but it would be quite a process to go through that. And again, the opinion is not universal that that's what needs to occur in order to improve our diversity on that. And might I add that we have not had a fire department hiring since that report was done, nor will we probably for quite some time.
Well, assuming that is a possibility, though, or a way of increasing, let's say, the women in the workforce, let's not stick with the fire department, but in the workforce, and taking into consideration the complexity you alluded to in doing it, what would you recommend? Let's say the commission was of a mind to look at that and take some action. What would you recommend? Well, first of all, I'd have to ask the city attorney whether this discussion has gotten beyond the scope of the demographics and whether we need to agendize this particular issue or whether we can continue discussing it.
You can absolutely continue discussing it. That is what's on the agenda is what you're discussing, the demographics of the workforce, and that's part of the discussion that you're having here.
So I think next I would ask my colleagues whether that would be an issue that we feel that we would pursue or ask staff to pursue, whether it's something that my colleagues feel is not worthwhile in terms of looking at the women workforce.
The bottom line, as Mr. Doyle has pointed out, what it would take to, and I'm all for more females in the workplace, but with regards to the rule of three, there would have to be a charter amendment put forth to the voters of the city of Glendale to vote on to change the charter. That's the only way it's going to change, period.
Right.
So we can hash this over and recommend that one of us go to the city council and say, I think it's time that we review the city charter again, and with the finances being what they are, to hold an election, or not an election, but a municipal vote on particular issues, I think would be rather expensive, and I think it would, in my opinion, get knocked down by the city council. I could be completely wrong. But if it's something that you feel is worth pursuing, yeah, certainly.
Wanted to make a comment on Commissioner Devine's point. I do agree with you, Commissioner Devine. I think we don't need to necessarily focus on the rule of three. Maybe we can try to brainstorm and try to see how we can be of help or come up with some suggestions as far as how we can try to promote certain positions that we are currently don't have enough females. And I do agree with you, Chairman, that the rule of three is if we only focus on that, I don't think we're going to be able to achieve much. I think if we just be able to brainstorm, bring this back on, agendize it, go through it, come up with different thoughts to see how we can look at that and see how we can attract more females into our, incorporating it into our demographics, I think that's something that we should consider looking at. But if we strictly focus on the rule of three, I do agree. I don't think we're going to get. I don't think that's going to necessarily resolve our issue. But we might end up coming up with other suggestions that might help. My thought, at least.
I agree with both of you. I mean, I'm willing to try anything.
And I
make the system better.
And I think it shouldn't just be focused at the fire department. I think it just an overall. That, as far as that, I do have a couple of other comments, but not related to that.
If you have other comments, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I too want to also thank the people that were involved in putting this report together. I also spent about at least 2 to 3 hours going through this, and it's probably one of the first reports that I actually understood. So, it gets down to the basics, and it's very clear on where we stand as far as demographics. And I have to really congratulate, starting with Mr. Doyle. This is not something that happened overnight. This took many, many years, and it comes from leadership from Mr. Doyle and his group, and all the department heads, city council, all the people that were involved in making this transition of the demographics, reflecting closely to the demographics of our city. And if you look at the past 10 years of this report, you really see the effort and the results we're starting to see. And I applaud all the departments, all the department heads, all that were involved in making this happen. There is a lot of we hear a lot of times a lot of different complaints, against different departments, the fire department, the police department. But when you look at the numbers and you see the progress that's been made, it's phenomenal. There's always room for improvements, but the results speak for themselves. And I wanted to thank everyone, especially you, Mr. Doyle, and your team to make this happen. This is not something that just happens by itself.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to, before we lose the thought of the previous thing we were talking about, perhaps we can kill two birds with one stone here. I agree with Mr. Manukian's thoughts on what should be done, and I'd also like to find out, at least academically, what it would entail to look at a charter change for the rule of three. And I like Mr. Manukian's thought of maybe we could agendize this and have staff come back with a report that would really give the Commission two items. Number one, it would give us the procedure or the process that if someone wants to initiate a charter change, what's involved with that? What's step one through step whatever it takes? And then the second item would be to go along with Mr. Manukian's thoughts and ask staff to come back with some other ideas on methods of increasing the women in the workforce, addressing the problems, or not problem, but the concern that you brought up, Mr. Doyle, about the lack of women, or the trend of not increasing the number of women in the Glendale workforce. So if you come back with some thoughts and recommendations, then the Commission could discuss that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I can perhaps give you a quick summary response on the first part of that. We can certainly bring that back at a later time, but the quick response on how you would effectuate a charter amendment, you'd have it one of two ways. The first way is a lot more difficult than the second. The first one is by petition. You'd have to collect signatures, etc., and that would make it incredibly difficult to do. The second way would be to have the Commission adopt a recommendation to the City Council and have it be Council initiated. And if you make the recommendation, if it's the will of the Commission to have a rule amendment, you'd have to make a recommendation to the City Council. Then they would study it, and if they agreed with you, then they'd place it not necessarily on a special election, but at the next municipal election, which would be in 2011. So it would be done in that way. It would obviously take more time because you don't have an election coming up anytime soon. But that would be the two ways that you would approach this.
knocks one item
Said
off your
take care
report.
of it.
Well, very concise, thank you.
She would have done the report, that part of it. So
I think she just did.
She just did. Excellent. Thank you.
Also, I think it would give us the opportunity. I'd like to also hear what my other fellow commissioners who have been on this commission much longer than I have would have, I'm sure, suggestions and ideas maybe how we can look at trying to get more women into our demographics. So I would be very interested.
Yes.
Well, I've tried to keep silent tonight, but that's awfully hard to do for me. This is indeed a great report, and it's been a trending that way, I think, for the last 3 or 4 years that I've looked at the report. I don't necessarily share as great a concern about the women for no reason other than while the percentage hasn't gone up, the percentage hasn't gone down, which means to me that in other words, in 1999, the workforce percentage of excuse me, here it is, was 31%, and in the female over total employees, and in 2008 it was 30.4%, which leads me to believe that we have been hiring basically on a 50-50 basis, an equality basis over the past 9 years. And going along with Mr. Doyle's comments, I always look at our workforce, and our workforce, as I recall from a while, is we have a very long workforce, a workforce with a lot of longevity in the city, 20, 25, 30 years. And if we go back 20, 25, 30 years, I think you'd find that the hiring trend vastly favored men. Not commenting on its goodness or its badness, but it was what it was. And as we are now going out, as these people are retiring, I think we're seeing, and I think particularly so in our own HR department, as you can notice, the HR department has over 80% of its employees are female. And as we all can look out at our staff here, always most of our analysts are female, and good employees. So I'm not as concerned about that. What I have noticed is that this has been something ongoing for a while. This is a concern in terms of not only the diversity and ethnicity, but also in females, and we've attacked it. We go to the cruise nights, we go to the job fairs, we send the staff out to do just that, and for the most part, we have Amy going. I've seen Amy there. Rosie's gone to these. So we're sending the women out to do the same thing. I just don't know. I just don't know that we're going to achieve any more than what we've got. It's possible that this is something that the Commission on Status of Women might have some different ideas, and maybe we could have a joint meeting with them if we think it's. But I just don't necessarily think it. I mean, it's somewhat disappointing, but I don't think it's that disappointing, and I'm not sure that what we offer is any more than what we're doing. I mean, do we want to really target females? I don't know. I mean, I think we're looking for the best employee. We haven't done a poor job. We've stayed static, which means we're hiring 50% females, which is what we should be ostensibly doing to keep ourselves in that position. But in the same token, I'm not sure I see what more we can do, because in our zeal, and that was the zeal to be sure that we increased our ethnicity, I don't think we singled men or singled women out. And so therefore I think we have been doing a good reach-out program. But it's possible that I've missed something. I'm not the most diverse person in the world. So a discussion could be helpful, but maybe a discussion that includes the Commission on Women in an overall discussion to get that might make some sense. And bring us maybe a little bit more in tune with some of the other issues that might be there from a civil service standpoint, that maybe, since the Commission on the Status of Women has been in existence now for a goodly period of time, they may be able to offer us some insight into other areas that we might be missing. That would be my suggestion. If we were going to discuss it, I think it should be discussed in a joint meeting with the Commission on the Status of Women.
I happen to agree with you. I think it's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah. I think so too.
Did you want to say something, Mr. Devine? Paula, I want you to listen to this very carefully.
I think I'll have to agree on that one also. I have
You
no
want to go
choice.
home?
You're red, Mr. Devine. Did you go to the beach just now? Is that?
I also do agree. I like your suggestions, and I think Mr. Devine's concern is more focused to some of our departments that
No, I agree with
are. I think that's the area of concern. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I like your suggestion. I think it'd be a very good idea for us to explore ideas with them, see how we can be of help in promoting that.
Just if I can just go back to the Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry,
Sure.
sir. I want us to realize one thing. I know this started out with the fire department, and we can't just change the rule of three or do anything that just focuses on the fire department. And I think we've pretty much beat that issue to death in terms of the challenges for females in the fire department, and we had that big article we were given, is really, in a lot of ways, the physical requirements. Having said that, I agree with you, Mr. Manukian, and if that's Mr. Devine's concern, I agree with that also, that there are departments that could do better. For instance, GWP, where I haven't even looked at this, but maybe there's, and this could come in with the committee, maybe there is training that allows women that can do, they can climb ladders, they can go up and do line work or go underground. They don't need to be lifting 50-pound barbells or 150 or whatever they are. And again, I think the question would be, okay, let's look at GWP. Where, from the Commission on the Status of Women, where do we think that we can get women more interested in, for instance, doing line work, a lot of the work that the city does in the public, the Parks and Rec, GWP, and stuff like that.
Sorry, just quickly, you brought up GWP. Your point exactly dead on. If you look at the numbers, I mean, from 1999 to today, there's a substantial decrease, actually. So that's a very good point. I do agree.
You mean? Again?
For once, I do agree.
No, second time. You gave it to me earlier, too.
Historical moment.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just discussing with Jason, this issue comes up periodically, and I do think we've done some prior analysis on this very issue, and I vaguely recall looking at some isolated departments and making the general assumption that there's probably four of our largest city departments: police, fire, water and power, and public works. By nature of those departments are predominantly male, and I believe it was in fact Jason who did a report on looking at those departments and then looking at those. Looking at those departments, city departments, other than water and power, police, public works, and fire, and finding that the gender ethnicity or the gender diversity was improving, and those four departments sort of skew the whole picture because they tend to be occupations that attract men to them by and large. So there has been some work done on this already, and it's probably a few years old. But I do, picking up on Commissioner Gantis's comments about my department in particular and the gender makeup there. You have a number of departments, again, not fire, not police, that have majority female by overwhelming majorities, including the finance department, or as it's listed here, administrative services, city attorney's office, city clerk, treasurer's office, community development and housing.
Absolutely.
You could go home, Mr. Coleman, as well.
Development services, human resources, library management services. So outside the big four, there is.
And they are the big four.
Yeah.
And it puts a dent in.
It does skew the results, and
Yeah.
I will note that putting aside Public Works and Fire, Police and GWP have been the two departments that have done the most hiring in the past 5 to 10 years. Police had when Chief Adams arrived, I think you all recall, he had an initiative. He attempted to hire up to 100 new officers. Didn't quite make it, but there were a lot of people brought on board there. GWP, being an enterprise fund, generally has a little bit more flexibility in hiring additional bodies. So those two departments have seen probably the most hiring in the city. And again, those happen to be two departments that have predominantly male population.
Just wanted to make one last comment, at least from. This was not meant to be in any way a criticism. This was, I think, just try to see if we could help
Sure.
in any way. And also, if everyone does decide to bring this back on, also one thing that would help us is for us to be able to just get an idea of what our other cities nearby, how do their ratios in those particular departments make up. It could very well be that we don't necessarily have a problem. It could very well be just the industry for XYZ department is mostly male or mostly female.
And Commissioner Manukian, that is a lot of work to compile that information, but I will say from our experience with the fire department report, which I think you were all here for that, which we did, I believe it was May of 2008, we did find that we were no different than the majority of the departments, ranging from small departments to large departments. We looked at the smaller departments within our Area C here. We looked at other departments within our labor market group. We looked across the country, New York City, Chicago, and they all found, just from a fire department standpoint, in that occupation, predominantly male. I suspect we would find the same.
Okay, I mean, if
elsewhere.
I mean, it's not my intent to create additional work. It's just if it's already been addressed, then by all means, then there.
It's been addressed relative to fire.
Chair, we seem to have gone full circle here. I think I started this conversation about 20 minutes ago by asking Mr. Doyle if he had any concerns about the demographics report. And if I heard correctly, it's my understanding that if he had a concern, it would be in the area of the hiring of the women in the workforce. And we weren't looking at any particular department, but the workforce in general. And based on that, I brought up the subject of the rule of three. That transcended into looking at other options because that seemed to be an onerous process. And then it's come back now to where I think I'm hearing from Mr. Doyle that perhaps it's really not a problem. And I agree with Mr. Manukian that if there's not a problem, let's not fix it. And so I need to ask again, based on what we've talked about the last 20 or 30 minutes, do you feel that it would be productive for this commission to ask staff to look into this, come back with suggestions, or do you feel there really isn't a problem that when you start looking at the things and analyzing it the way Mr. Gaddis did, that if we don't do anything, it'll be just fine?
Commissioner Devine, you asked me if I had any concern about this report, and I'm not going to change the way I would have answered that question, knowing what followed it. But again, I was being very honest. And maybe it's not a concern, but it was a little bit of a surprise to see that again the changing changing of the demographics relative to race and ethnicity was clearly not matched by that of increasing numbers of females. That was my only concern. And again, it's not so much a concern as just a bit of a surprise, given the efforts that have been made, and obviously in the last 10 to 20 years, we've seen more women entering the workforce than previous generations. So that was just a bit of a surprise. I, frankly, would never want to close the door on any additional dialogue on things that we could be doing to improve our outreach to females or any underrepresented group. And so, if it is the desire of the Commission to at least explore that, we'd be happy to do that. I'm never content to say that we've done everything we can possibly do and that we can never get better.
That was a political answer.
All right, well, based on that, and to get this off of square one here, I don't know if we need to make a motion or suggestion or how we would proceed, but I definitely like Mr. Gantis' thought of combining perhaps a meeting with the Commission on the Status of Women to go over these issues, and I'm not sure how we would proceed with that, and I'll have to ask our attorney the best way to
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, we can approach the Commission on the Status of Women. If you had an in and you wanted to talk with the chair of the Commission, that would certainly help, but we will take that message back to them. We'll speak with the staff, we'll speak with the chair, and let them know the desire of this Commission, and then the staff will make that happen.
And I think in conjunction with that, we would still need, and again, I'll have to have input from my colleagues, we would still need, I guess for lack of a better word, an agenda, items that we would like to look at, and the reason for doing this, and perhaps we could ask staff, whether it be the attorney's office or resources, to put together before we contact the Commission sort of an agenda and the concerns and the things we'd be discussing with them.
We can work with the chair in doing that.
So that would be my suggestion, and my colleagues, of course, have to up it or down it.
Unless their opinions have changed, I think what we heard earlier that they all thought it was a good idea.
Agree.
So we can work with this chair and the Commission on the Status of Women's chair and put together an agenda and then set a special meeting.
Any other comments on this particular agendized matter? Next item, please.
Agenda forecast.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, your agenda forecast is before you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Might I add that Mr. Bradford's boss is transitioning. It's somewhat of an unfortunate thing that he's stepping down as city auditor, but we are fortunate to keep him in the organization. Mr. Fox is taken a position with the Water and Power Department as an assistant general manager overseeing their finance operation. So I think that took effect last week. So Bill Fox will no longer be our city auditor, and he's joining the Water and Power team. So we wish him a lot of luck in that job. He is a great, great employee, great manager, and really has done a lot for the city relative to his role as a city auditor. We will miss him.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the agenda forecast. At our next meeting, we will have our biannual report on hourly employment for the 08-09 fiscal year. And on the 23rd, we'll have the rule amendments that have been under consideration for some time. We hope to present that to you. Again, a first glance at what's being proposed, and then receive some further direction on from you. So.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Other than the hourly employment, is there anything that's pressing for that meeting? That is certainly something that doesn't take a great deal of time, and it's my understanding that our council will not be here for the next meeting, and it would seem to me I would make a motion that we cancel the next meeting unless there's something that you think is pressing that's coming to us.
I see a head nodding in the audience. I don't know if that means there's nothing else or there's something.
Oh, okay. Then I withdraw my motion. And you've lost your one check mark you had with me, Manya.
Would it be possible to postpone that item for 2 more weeks? Maybe you ought to speak in the microphone so we can...
Oh, well, I think members of the commission are, myself included, are having a conflict with regards to our availability.
On?
Because I'd already discussed with Mr. Doyle the possibility of canceling the October 14th meeting.
It's my birthday. They should cancel.
There's nothing on the agenda forecast, and
They want to post that.
I've got travel plans. So,
Right
But unless there's something pressing, I agree with Mr. Candace's suggestion. Unless there's something pressing on the 9th, we could combine the 9th with the 23rd and still cancel the 14th.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
may I suggest that it's certainly a decision that you could make after the meeting. You don't need a motion at this time, but in discussion with with Mr. Doyle after the meeting, you could make a determination of whether or not you have items that are pressing for the 9th, and then make a determination at that time whether or not to cancel it.
and if it was just, if it was more commissioners than myself, I mean, we can't all have a meeting with Mr. Doyle and discuss this without
No, it's you.
violating
It would be
Brown
you.
Act.
Chair.
It's you. We passed a policy now regarding this that the chairman has that authority in consultation with the
Okay.
staff.
I just don't want to offend anybody. And
Promise you, if you canceled a meeting, you would not offend me. I can tell
Actually,
you.
it's my birthday. You should close down the city that day.
Mr. Chair, the only pressing item we know of for September the 9th involves the approval of a promotional safety bulletin, this being for the fire engineer position. Under our rules, all of those bulletins must be brought before the commission prior to the bulletin being posted. And fire department is on a very tight time frame now. Something we've done in the past is to grant, and I can speak with the chair, grant preliminary approval of that. We don't anticipate this being in any way controversial. It is a bulletin that will be brought before you on the 9th, would be brought before you on the 9th, is fully consistent with the class specification. And if the chair were to grant us preliminary approval to post that bulletin and on, which would probably be September the
23rd.
What's the following Monday? Yeah,
14th.
September the 14th for its normal period of 2 to 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and then to formally hear it at the next meeting on the 23rd, in case there is anything of controversy that arises with the employee association or something like that. I think we can go ahead and cancel that meeting on the 9th.
Okay. Anything else on that? Next item?
So we will cancel the meeting on the 9th?
We haven't, no one did anything with it, so it is what it is. It stays.
Pardon me?
Well, no, the chair can still do
The
that.
chair can still do it, subject to the chair.
It's done.
Oh, it's done. So it's canceled?
That is correct.
Okay.
Just before we get off that item, when would the commission like to see the joint meeting with the Women's Commission occur?
First part of next year.
Okay.
It gives everybody plenty of time, right?
Okay.
I don't want to rush it.
Okay, there might be coordination issues and scheduling, so it would help. Okay, thank you.
Reports and information.
Mr. Doyle?
I have none.
Done?
None.
Gentlemen? Next item, please.
Civil Service Commission and staff comments.
Just had a quick question. Do we have any updates on the firefighter recovery?
Yeah, Commissioner Manukian, as a matter of fact, I was planning to address that. Firefighter Hambarchian has been released from the Grossman Burn Center. He is recovering at home. He's being seen by the doctor at least twice a week, and he's got a long road of recovery ahead of him. But all is going well. He's a young man, still in his 20s, and he's very optimistic, very eager to return to work. Several of us have gone to visit him, at least when he was in the burn center, and he's progressing well. He's got skin grafts that he's currently dealing with, and that's a very painful process. But thus far, the skin grafts are taking well, and there's been no infections or anything like that. As you know, he had burns on significant parts of his body, leg, back, arms, and the worst was on his hands. The right hand, the index finger is particularly bad. But again, it's the process is going well, and he's healing well. Just again a reminder of the dangers of that particular occupation, that someone could be subject to this type of an injury. Very devastating injuries.
Or death. They lost.
Yes.
How many did they lose in Buffalo?
Oh, yeah.
Well, our prayers and
Absolutely.
with him and his family. So
Absolutely.
hopefully soon recover.
He's starting rehab in about 2 weeks, so it'll be a long road ahead. But nobody believes that these injuries are career-ending. So
Wonderful.
That's the best news.
Wonderful to hear.
Fortunately, our workers' compensation system does take good care of our employees when they get injured, and he's afforded sufficient time to recover, and not lose any of his benefits, pay, or anything like that. So,
Good to hear.
All right. Next item.
Closed session.
I don't believe we have anything in closed session.
Move to adjourn.
So be it. Thank you, folks. Meeting is adjourned.